Morning, everyone. I do miss the energy of a live conference, the serendipity of meeting people, and as I'm sure a lot of you and my fellow panelists would. Such is the nature of a quarantine and social distancing era that we are in. But it's also a great canvas for the opportunities. If I look at my fellow panelists today, we have the experts joining in from all the way from Dublin to Hong Kong to Singapore to India to have people who are globe hopping. So I couldn't ask for a better opportunity. Something like this current lockdown has provided to have this kind of a forum really with us. Uh, as my compare and friend introduced, so we have Charles from HSBC, Maria from PayPal, Sarabjit from Stancy, and Jaya from BCP Digital. A great kind of a constellation of practitioners from different aspects. And today we're going to debate about identifying the emerging technologies that can emerge, that can help the BFSI sector lead to the future. And the keynote by Ramnan sir at some level really laid the groundwork. It did go beyond financial services. It did give a gamut of host of technologies which could be relevant. Very importantly, in my mind, it spoke about a lot of technologies which might be needed in a market like India, which has very diverse. There's a fair bit of inequality in income. There are a lot of last mile physical like challenges. At the same time, for a country like this, emerging technology offers an opportunity to leapfrog. It could be our cell phone movement, where we really kind of leapfrogged it because we could make it cost effective and build it at scale. So without further ado, I would like some opening remarks from my esteemed panelists. Probably we'll start with you, Charles, and really opening remarks on, in your experience and in your geography that you observed, what are the gamut of emerging technologies, and what is your view on them? Which ones have the hype cycle? Which ones have are really a practical utility as we speak right now? Over to you. We'll go a quick around the table after you, Charles, but over to you first.
Thank you, Vivek, and I'm delighted to be here with you. And I take on your challenge, which is to keep our energy levels high during this virtual conference. So if I think about HSBC and the path we've been on for the past few years, I would say we've been putting modern software development practices at the heart of banking. And if I go into a few of the ideas behind that, it starts with actually taking a different approach to how we think about software development. It starts with the customer. I get about 100 written pieces of customer feedback every day. It takes all of us looking at those pieces of feedback and looking at the customer journeys, researching and testing and iterating and simplifying. It's also about cross-functional working, so no longer business and technology working differently, but teams working together. It's about empowering and the role of the leader as an enabler, as opposed to an unblocker, as opposed to someone at the top of a pyramid. And really about agile development. So we've moved to 2 weekly sprints and regular releases and all of those sorts of activities. But if I turn to the bit around actual technologies that we're seeing widespread adoption in HSBC, I would say we've fully embraced technologies, all part of modern software development, like containerization, stateless APIs with standard contracts, regardless of which country you're in, continuous integration and continuous development pipelines, automated tests, fully native mobile apps, cloud solutions. All of those things, I would say, were the bread and butter of how we bring digital experiences to our customers. And then I'd say there's a couple of technologies which we're just starting to get closer to, and in particular, artificial intelligence and machine learning. We're just starting to get some great use cases out using those technologies. So that's where I'd say we are, Vivek, in terms of a roundup of our use of modern software development.
Lovely, Charles. Tough to spot what is not being done. Maria, same query to you.
Yeah, very happy to. And thanks so much for the lovely introduction as well, Vivek, to set the scene. So I think Charles did a great job with, in general, kind of giving the picture of where we're all at. I think it's really hard to stand still. It's really bad if we ever stand still. And in PayPal specifically, Obviously, we are customer focused. We want to be where the customer is, and the customer moves. Like we move. Well, maybe not currently during a pandemic, but our minds continue to develop. We want to leap into the future, like Vivek said. And the way we see it in PayPal is it's a life cycle. So emerging technologies is always a life cycle. It's if we could illustrate that by way of using some of the technologies that we are quite interested in, the early stages, and it's really in the spirit of innovation, is doing that research, checking up and in with the industry, understanding what the lawmaker is thinking about. Might be talking about this a bit more later on. And that early stage for us is definitely blockchain. We're doing that research. We're just trying to figure out what the use cases are, frankly. And this is a really exciting space to be in. And it's a trial and error, again, very much in the spirit of innovation. And then the more mature phase, where we do start executing a strategy, where the industry also does that, especially in Europe now, is for us is open banking in the European space, which is very exciting. This is when it gets competitive. This is where we're now finding ourselves after years and years of exploring. And then kind of to put this then towards the more mature migration phase, so to speak. And when I say mature, there's still so much to learn, still so much to do, is really that cloud space for PayPal. We've done all of the previous stages. Now is we have a few use cases that were put into public cloud. We have learned a tremendous amount. We've found the right partners. And now it's organically trying to find the use cases from within the company and align that with, of course, our very high standards in terms of security, technical reliability, and efficiency. So this is kind of where PayPal is at, a bit of a flavor, but so much going on, of course.
Fantastic framework of thinking in terms of a life cycle. Sarabjit, good for you to join us, and same query to you, your opening remark on.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I'm here.
Maybe. Thanks, Maria.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So thank you, Vivek, for the introduction and having me to share my thoughts. So at Standard Chartered, it's really been our focus, our laser sharp focus on digitization and innovation. And when I speak about digitization, it's really about client servicing and onboarding. And we adopt which is really to service our clients seamlessly, as well as allow them to get onboarded seamlessly. So that's a very, very key focus area. We've started investing a while back, and a large part of our investments flow in this area. And linked in with this digitization for Standard Chartered is our focus on innovation, which is specifically in the areas of cloud, APIs, and data. Now, just to briefly touch upon these areas, I think from a bank's perspective, we have adopted a cloud-first approach. We have already gone live with over 16 production applications in the cloud. I mean, a lot more on areas which are SaaS-based, but I think banks' production applications on cloud. And just to give you an example, last weekend, we went live with our core banking platform for Vietnam on the cloud. And this journey continues in the rest of 2020 and 21. In the next 2-3 years, we expect to have about 80% of our workloads on the cloud. Switching into the next topic, which is really around APIs. And again, here we adopt a multi-pronged approach. And when I say that, what does it mean? We actually partner with organizations in a country, and we use their distribution network to co-create products to enable financial needs for their clients. The second adoption approach that we have is to co-create with our own clients. And there are very good examples of at least 15 to 16 clients in India, a handful in Singapore, and a few more in other markets, where we are collaborating with them in the BFSI space, in the manufacturing space, in the retail space, for it to be a mutually beneficial partnership. So that's the second approach. And the third approach is really setting up an entity which is meeting unmet financial needs. An example of that is Solve. And within all these things, why I mentioned about these approaches is because all this is really enabled through the use of APIs. And we have some live examples where I was talking about digitization. So in Singapore, for example, MyInfo. In India, for example, UPI, which has been adopted by billions of payments really at this point, and is seamlessly being integrated and adopted through APIs. And the third part I'll quickly touch on is data, AI, and ML. And here, I think it's been a journey for us. We have been continuously investing on this, and it's really started with use cases which are around regulatory reporting. So I think after that, it's really been maturing ourselves into how do we convert these data marts into data lakes, which are then understood well by our businesses and our stakeholders, for us to be able to make use of this data. Make use of this data in multiple dimensions. One could be around client experience. How do you do hyper personalization? How do you get better insights from data to be able to put contextual offers and deals to our clients? So that's one use case. The other thing that we're moving towards is AI ML, where making use of examples which are in the space of enabling for let's say credit decisioning. So these are things which are again kind of live examples in multiple of our markets, which are enabling this core innovation. So so I'll kind of possibly stop here with a few thoughts.
Very comprehensive. Next quick, Jaya, to you. We heard some interesting opening remarks from all the three panelists. You really come from a product and services background. What is your take on emerging technologies?
I have the distinct advantage of going last. So an easy answer to that question would be all of the above. As CEO of a fintech, we are largely business first, technology agnostic. So in the sense that we do use different technologies, and our objective is to provide a business solution to various needs. So while you look at the product focus, we see two distinct segments. The first is on the user experience, which, the easy answer is use of data analytics, looking at the big data and looking at AI ML. But what we see is tip of the iceberg. Where we do bulk of the work is in the area of mid office and back office. So we see the use of blockchain increasingly happening. We see a lot of predictive analytics and AI ML with distinct use cases. It's more used from a perspective of what a human being cannot do currently, rather than to replace what a human being can. So very distinct focus on what it is. Example would be, Sarab just mentioned credit decisioning. So what exactly in credit decisioning? It comes from a perspective of looking for data that's not available today to make a credit decision on yes or no. Or there are a lot of maybes. How do you kind of use those data points to convert a maybe to a clear yes or no? And that comes from the power of having a lot more data at your disposal. That comes from the realm of big data. That comes from a lot of additional data points a traditional bank would never use. And that's the power that we see of the technologies we mentioned. I'm going to keep it short because I know we are going to
Perfect. We'll come back to it and we'll double click. Yeah. What I love was the balancing of when Charles started with really focus on methods and emerging technology. From this initial opening remarks seemed quite common in terms of understanding of what is productionizable and probably what is the hype cycle. But lovely to see the other cogs around it that all the panelists have woven. Fantastic. Charles, would love to move on to you. Want to deep dive on few themes now. Probably we'll pick you on talking more on AI and ML, and specifically with your experience as a banker, how it is shaping digital consumer experience. Charles, would love to hear some detailed remarks on that.
Thank you, Vivek. And I've really, in machine learning, I think we've really seen a uptick in real production use cases in the last 2 or 3 years. Let me give 3 examples from HSBC. The first one actually is about life insurance and us wanting to offer a life insurance product to our customers. And it's a super simple use case. We've built an algorithm that looks at the data we have about the customer. And what that allows us to do is look at their eligibility to reduce the number of questions they have to answer. So super simple, you go down from 20 questions down to 10 questions. And actually in some cases, we can say with a really minimal amount of additional input by the customer, we can offer the customer that product. So that's for me, nice little...
Reducing the friction in that story, yeah.
Exactly. Little bit more involved. Another great use case for us is around sales quality checks. So we, like I'm sure many financial service companies, we have customers call in, we manage have those conversations through our contact centers. And we want to make sure that the conversations, particularly where we have regulatory obligations around disclosure, product disclosure, that we're having those conversations the right way. In the past, that's relied on people listening to calls and flagging calls where we need to do some remediation. We've got some great success using voice to text, transcription, natural language processing, a few other machine learning algorithms to allow us to programmatically identify areas where we have some concerns, and then to be able to remediate those, often giving the customer a call and making sure we've explained the product correctly. And then the third one is actually one that I really like. It's about ATM cash refilling. So we have great data about how much cash is in each ATM. We have great data about how often customers go to cash machines and withdraw cash. And we've put machine learning to work on that use case. And what it lets us do across, on average, it allows us to visit each ATM one time less frequently per month, by optimizing the days when we go to the ATM and how much cash gets loaded to each one. And one ATM visit per month, when you add it up across a whole estate, it's another benefit of operational improvements we're seeing from ML. So for us at HSBC, I'd say in the last few years, we've seen it going from a few test areas that look a bit interesting, and now it's more just how widely can we apply this technology into many, many areas where we've had to have or estimates or manual work in the past. So lots of application of machine learning, Vivek.
If you would allow me to do one follow-through query to you. Since you mentioned ATMs, around these times, and especially post-COVID, we do believe that consumer preferences will change in some regard. So clearly, probably there will be preference for low-touch digital channels and less preference for, let's say, physical channels, right? So you as a banker, how do you prioritize your emerging technology investments into these themes, into what would be the future and what you have to support in the interim, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and so it's a great question. I mean, and we've launched sort of part solutions, I would say, actually the ones that our customers love. So with Hang Seng, you can now tap your mobile app on an ATM to get cash out. You don't need your card. And then more generally, as you said, we've seen a real increase in digital usage, mobile usage in particular, over the past 12 months. At HSBC, actually already over 90% of our transactions are digital. And we're seeing that continuing to grow. So it's, we have this phrase, our bank in your pocket. And what that means for us is everything that you might want to do with a bank, chat to a relationship manager, get help through a contact center, service your account, pay your bills. We want that really with you. And that's the path we're on to bring all of that to our customers to make it as easy as possible for them to access the bank services.
Cool, Charles. I wish all of us have big pockets like that. Maria, you really touched upon open banking. Probably now let's pivot into another dimension of emerging and a bit around banking. Can you double click on that? And PayPal as a very specific entity and an operator for a while, you would have your unique views of how ecosystems could get built. So Maria, that's the query to you.
Yeah, happy to share. So it's definitely been a bit of a journey, but I think that's what it's all about. In our journey, before I leap into some of the use cases, just to give some insights, of course started in and around 2014-15 when the PSD2 directive came into effect. But I think to touch back on my life cycle example, so what we really seen with this directive, I mean, it was monumental for Europe. This was a monumental bill, so to speak. It was very undescriptive, very open-ended, very confusing, and yet a lot to build upon it. While the industry had already been testing, trying to get the feelers out, this was the regulatory answer. So as PEPA, we're always close to our lawmakers anyway. We want to work with our governments, and I think really what happened in this instance, which is quite a nice story in terms of how we can work together, is we of course always want to share our customers' opinion on what works, what doesn't work. Effortless transactions should still be at the heart of it, while we still also protect our customers, which is very much what we're all about. And of course, what PSD2 was supposed to address, amongst many other things, is customer privacy. But if you think about it from an emerging technology perspective, what wasn't clear is what kind of technology should the industry even use in order to implement the regulations? And this is where it became extremely interesting, because some governments are further than others. I'm sure all of you have the same experience. So some have already leapt into that space. UK was quite at the forefront at this, played with different types of information security protocols. That was a topic that went on for many, many years. And the good news is that there was some trust built based on all the exploration that was already done within tech companies. And thankfully, the lawmakers have taken that upon them and have taken that into account at the time. But this is why it's so critical to have that symbiosis and symbiotic relationship, I believe, because without that, we will stand still. If this is what the law prescribes, if this is the technology that we have to use, and also if it's super prescriptive anyhow, it's also debatable whether that is a good idea or not. So we don't want to find ourselves in that space, and we do not want to stop competition. Competition for people is great, keeps us young and fresh and moving. We want to see that. So this is really where this whole journey started for us, and it had to start that way. Our use cases in open banking may seem very, well, simple, you might say. We want to be where the customer is. We want to expand with the customer, and like Charles said so nicely, you're a bank in a pocket. We also want to be the cloud. We want to be around. We want to be where you need us, and with as minimal steps as possible, ideally. And that's where payment initiation, we had to be there. We had to be in that space, but it has to be done in the right way. So security paramount, forward-looking, really important. Finding the right partners and growing with our partners that actually offer some of the solutions that we need. And of course, as I keep saying and repeating, pondering on risk. A lot of use cases around risk, the instant bank confirmation, what does that mean? Huge conversations around instant know your customer as well, the reliance on our partners and banks. And of course, spending patterns of customers. I think that was mentioned before as well. One thing I want to put forward is the finding your use case should always, I mean, sounds so simple, but in Europe, we got lost in that a bit. We got lost by the shiny of the data Eldorado that open banking offered to us. So a lot of use cases, it went left, right, and center. Oh, you could do hyper-personalization, you could do, but who you are as a company is really important in that, because the customer does not often not know what the add value is, or the customer is very clear on what it is. And you know, you need to move with the customer. So just chasing the shiny will not really help you. So for us, when we look at spending patterns, the only reason why we do that is to understand whether the customer in front of us is truly the human being that we know, or is it someone else that is an imposter and trying to access this information? That's the only reason why we want to use that data. So trying to not run after the shiny after done all your research is really, really hard. And I think open banking, that was a tough challenge for all of us.
Great point. I think taking that thought of bringing your own authentic self, whether you're as an individual or an organization, is probably the key to find right solution to it. Saurabh, probably bringing you in to give an inside out view on, as a banker, how do you see open banking and APIs, and probably linking that to data and cloud, which are quite close to your heart?
Yeah, thanks. So essentially, I think open banking is something that was very hard to embrace to start with. You know, as a bank, oh, what will happen to my data? Why should I give my data to my competitors? But I think it's been a journey, and it's been a very interesting one. I've been working in Singapore and in India with the regulators and other partners in both these countries as well. And as you would know, FPDS is something which is now kind of live in Singapore, and the use cases are moving forward. So moving on from that journey where you were scared to provide that data to then embracing that change and then enabling it, and again enablement comes through APIs. So you know, as I was mentioning, we've adopted APIs, and we've got over 150. We've taken an approach to put up an access portal where our developers and our partners can come sandbox test. Once you have done that, you can actually then partner with us, or we go actively with our and work with our clients. I was giving examples of insurtech or even fintech players where we're working with them on specific use cases, co-creating and delivering real-time solutions which are enabling us as a bank to provide better solutions and the partner to actually benefit from it. So I think this whole concept of open banking can be kind of extended into use cases that you're using with your clients, your partners, with other players, fintech players in the marketplace as well. And there's no real harm in actually doing that. I think it's for the better benefit. It goes even into financial inclusion then, which is something that we are going after in India as well, where you know a lot of the population is unbanked. So why should that be the case? How can we kind of enable that even more? And I think really the cloud journey is, whilst it's a kind of buzzword to use, but I think for us it is bread and butter. And the more we go towards this journey, the better it is for us, because it's really about scalability, it's about security, it's about resilience. You know, you take how the world outside is changing. People announce, those Friday sales or those big sales, and suddenly your systems are all choked up. Now, you see the potential of moving a core banking and a payments platform onto the cloud, horizontally scalable, scale as these volumes grow, and scale up and down with no major investments, where in the past you would be stuck. So I think these are real live examples of how these new technologies are helping and benefiting us. And I think the most important and I'll just stop with a very small comment on data AI. I think Jaya was also mentioning before, credit decisioning and many other things are in the works now. Obviously, we are playing around with a few of them because we want to be ourselves absolutely sure that what we are doing with AI and ML, we are doing it in a responsible way, because that has many risks associated with it. So yeah, I think that's
Great
really
point.
our take and an inside-out view on from a banking perspective.
Responsible AI is another theme that we as a firm are also following very closely. It's a very key part. We don't know what we don't know, right? But sir, if you allow me to do another deep dive query to you, a lot of conversation on data, whether it's data mart, data lakes, data on cloud. Uh, well, there's one part of the conversation which has been built with the traditional organization in mind, the way a traditional organization had branches and customer channels and so on and so forth. Is an opportunity to look at data and analytics a little differently in this open banking world? Do they go hand in hand with API? Do you want real-time intelligence baked into it? A little bit of nuance there. Is there a way to strategically look at your data investments in an open banking world, or do you think it could be just another data mart to solve that problem?
Yeah, so I think the when you speak about open banking, it's really how do you enable this access from an open banking perspective. And once that access is enabled, then so let's say we are implementing data and analytics right at the front end of our channel, our wholesale banking channel, our retail banking channel. So once that is in place, then it is really an access point from an open banking. And because our own internal systems are API enabled. So I use the same API as would you be used by an open banking. So the data coming into my data mart, and I would still go traditional, and I say my data mart is in the bank's data mart, is where all this comes and gets stored. It doesn't matter if it's coming from an open channel or it's coming from an internal channel, then you should be able to cut and slice your data and use it appropriately. So,
Sure, sure.
but yeah, I think there is merit in your point about thinking about, can there be like an open banking concept? Can there be a central authority like a Reserve Bank or somebody else who is the custodian of the industry-wide data? And that's another topic to really open up a Pandora's
Right.
box. So,
Absolutely. And the other angle there was in open banking and partnership scenarios, so much data is sitting on that edge. And there might be some data you may not be able to bring back. There's some data the partners may not be able to take back. So it might require its own constructs. But yeah, love to chat further sometime around that. Jaya,
sure.
probably I think Stan is giving me nudges. I would like to bring you in and probably we'll move to the last segment after that. The part which probably you can help us shed light a little bit more on is we spoke a fair bit about different front end applications and digital experiences and open banking. But really many times the mid office, back office, risk functions, reconciliations, many of those are huge cost centers as well as big important areas for an organization. So Jaya, your experience in how emerging technologies have been used to either give a compliance advantage or a cost advantage, or at least comfort to sleep at night to many financial services institutions. Jaya, your remarks, please.
Sure, absolutely. And I would rather pick on, there are a lot of technologies we spoke about. Maybe I'll just take a section of it, especially on AI/ML and predictive analytics as a whole, and talk about one example, which is the risk function, risk and compliance. So what we see is that more and more for core credit decisioning, for risk management, for active management, there's a lot of use of AI/ML with predictive analytics. Let me explain two scenarios. One is on the core process of, let's say, early warning system, which is NPAs are a huge problem for banks worldwide. And while you're looking at alerts as a whole, one of the factors to look at is where do you get the data? And the data, like I said, traditionally was looking at core banking loan origination, which is post-mortem analysis. You say you suspect there is two segments. One is willingness to pay, other is ability to pay. Willingness is more issue of scams, what happens more and more in a country that we are seeing in India, for example. So that comes from a perspective of looking at it as what are the other elements of data you can tap to kind of look at when a beneficiary is set up, for instance. Is that beneficiary in the news for the wrong reasons? Are they subject to frequent management audits? Have the directors dumped shares? And therefore, should that be an alert to you? So there are so many things that you can watch out for patterns. And then you use the AI/ML layer sitting on top of a predictive analytics engine to tell you with 86.3% probability, indeed, they're diverting funds. And how do you know? Because you recognize the pattern. You recognize and you have a statistical methodology that embeds or underpins that, and it comes up with a score. How powerful is that compared to looking at it post-mortem analysis and saying there is something fishy going on with an account? So that puts the power back into the credit, the credit monitoring team to kind of take early interventions to prevent that from happening. Second, very popular use case is that of, let's say, quantification of losses because of COVID. Most of us go through this annual report cases where there's a section that says, we had losses because of COVID. What exactly was the loss because of COVID? Can you do a scenario analysis on it? If a vaccine is found, say, in January versus March versus June, and it's deployed worldwide, how can you say that the company is going to be, what's the curve going to be looking like? Is that a J curve? It's a V-shaped curve? What exactly is the quantification of absolute quantification of losses? That's something that, we've seen increasing use case where you use predictive analytics, you do scenario modeling, your model risk management comes under the radar of these variables that you're looking at. And then you come up with scores to predict, saying, you pattern the old models of what your losses have been and predict what the future is going to be. That puts an enormous amount of power into a statement. It is no longer a speculative statement. It's an assertive statement that actually tells your stakeholders, where is that curve going to be? When are you going to recover? What's the pattern going to be? And what's the absolute number at loss? So that's, again, an example of AI/ML and data analytics because I picked on the topic. More and more what we see is that, like Sarab said, like Charles said, We are also finding a lot of use cases, especially out of India, where that is being rendered on a SaaS model or compliance as a service model. So that's again a concrete adoption that we see people are moving away from. So I'll stop here in the interest of time, but you have your
Great.
closing remarks as well.
But thank you so much, Jaya. I think you put one emerging theme of as service models, which we hadn't debated till now. Thank you for bringing that out. And on a lighter note, I understand the latest favorite letter of the alphabet is K. And it feels like all data curves are solved in the letters of the alphabet that we have. So, but I understand we are short on time. What I would like to do is probably do one final round. We've spoken of so much about the kind of use cases and opportunities, both for the organization as well as for the ecosystem. If you can really tap everyone's mind and probably let's do the reverse so that Jaya, probably I'll start with you. And talking about what is the real barrier to large enterprises adopting emerging technology. I mean, that's a broad theme we will cover across the panel. And really question for you is if you want to talk through in terms of elements of setting up a vision, kind of changing the enterprise mindset, attracting new talent. So what are the things to be done, which are today barriers? If an organization does it well, they can reap benefits of adopting it moving forward. So I'll start with you, probably go to Sarab and wrap it up with Charles.
Sure. I think in terms of barriers to entry, the barriers are different by country, right? And in a country like, if you're looking at a country like India, we spent the morning session on Atmanirbhar Bharat. I think the biggest roadblock is in the opening of the adoption of technologies as a whole. There are a lot of regulatory standpoints that prevent a lot of the latest technology being adopted. For instance, clouds is embraced in a lot of countries, whereas we have a lot of restrictions in the use of what type of bank, like a public sector bank, and the adoption of a public cloud. That is still light years away, right? And so we are talking about private sector banks and their adoption to new technologies. But bulk of what we see is the public sector banks, and they have, still a lot of resistance to adoption of technologies. Even open source code in certain components are kind of like looked down upon. So it's more about what can be adopted as a strict methodology in public sector banks. And that's bulk of where our India banks, right? So that is something that's light years away. So that's a customer mindset I'm talking about. And from a perspective of, as we work in 20 plus countries, I could say country by country, there are different barriers to entry. And you will have to look at it from a perspective of a lens of what is a regulatory need, what are good practices in the country, and how you go about it. I think in terms of talent itself, see the Citibanks, we spoke about HSBC, we've been talking about PayPal, we've been talking about Standard Chartered Bank. I think there you have a much more wider talent pool to tap into. But I think I bring back the mindset into looking at a public sector bank. Do they have the resources that are more techno-functional to adopt some of that? And while the fintech players come in with a lot of knowledge of these, running it as a business as usual needs that techno-functional bandwidth to carry through. And that's neither budgeted for internally and neither is that available internally. So that's a huge spectrum of what you're dealing with in a country like India. Third is more attracting talent when you're an entrepreneur or you're looking at a fintech itself, right? And we all know that we've been speaking about AI/ML use cases. Worldwide, there's a dearth of talent on AI/ML. And you have the concept of acqui-hiring, which is you hire firms to get the knowledge of AI/ML. And what the AI/ML we are even talking about today is just, it's just a beginnings. We're talking about more, basic AI, and we're not talking about widespread adoption of neural nets and things like that. So there's a huge talent shortage, and that is going to be the greatest barrier in my mind in terms of adoption of technology. One is regulation, second is availability of talent, and from a perspective of a fintech, you're not selling a roadmap to say these are the things that you're going to be working on. There's no job description. It's more a vision or a dream that you're selling in terms of the future end state of what the product is going to be looking like. And that needs a different kind of a mindset, and it has a risk-taking ability to invest in a technology without not knowing for sure what the adoption is going to be, both from a clientele perspective, from a regulatory perspective. So you're investing ahead of the market movement. And that's not for a definitive need that is there today, but we anticipate the need and say this is going to be your need for the future. So I think it covers a whole gamut of that. And, so I would probably touch upon a few of those, top being regulatory, availability of talent, and risk and reward metrics, and more selling your dream rather than selling a concrete vision when you're talking about newer technologies.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for keeping it so grounded. Saurabh, from your perspective, from whatever you have shared, you've clearly transcended some of the barriers. So what are your learnings from larger enterprises from adopting emerging technologies, and what are the secrets of the success?
Yeah, so I think when I was hearing Jaya speak, I think these are very, very real challenges she's talking about, and I think we've been through some of those journeys, and it's really players for players to be ahead of the curve on this. So internally, all of that is kind of true. Where what is your business stakeholder buy-in? How do you convince them in plain speak? How do you make them show benefits from a client and business benefits point of view? So if you have the sales story right internally, then it is about aligning your investments to go behind that, whether it's cloud, API, or data, or AI, or ML. And then the third dimension is to overcome internally is on the risk side, in terms of how do you have the governance frameworks to control these new technologies coming in, whether it's cloud, data, AI, and there are huge risks associated with it, whether it is cyber or, and then once you overcome these barriers, and it takes time to do that, because if you're setting a framework, it takes time to set up a governance framework for cloud, for APIs, or for data. And as you learn, you develop that even further. So I think that's on the internal side of things. And then when you go external, it's how do you engage your client? So there has to be a business need, right? I could have the best API in the world, but there's no takers and there's no good use case. So the success of it lies within the usage. And that's what we've been doing with our clients, to co-create and say, tell me your stated business problem. And once that stated business problem is true, then you tune your solutions, and API happens to be a means to achieve it, to connect, right? It's not the only thing to connect. So I think that's the next barrier, which is external client centricity, focus, creating something that they need. And once that is created, then the adoption should come automatically. Okay. The other aspect of the external part is regulations. And again, Jaya was touching on it. So many regulators are forward looking. Like you take a regulator in Singapore or Hong Kong and a few other markets, they are wanting you to adopt and move forward. We are working on use cases with MAS in Singapore, where we're talking about AI, ML, and they are pushing it very hard, notwithstanding the risks associated with it. So on one side, I'm having conversations in the industry. We're talking about financial inclusion. We're talking about open banking. We're talking about AI, ML, and progressing on use cases. On the other side, the same regulator on the BAU role for me is coming and telling me, okay, tell me how are you overcoming these risks. So I think it's a balance you need to achieve, and really you have to demonstrate to the regulator that you are in control of your risks. I think that's the way, and people understand that there are risks associated. And to top that off, in many of our markets now, we see localization. Take India, for example. So when you're using cloud, data, API, how would you take care of that localization? So I think these are some of the challenges, both internal and external.
Thank you so much, Saurabh. Beautiful summary of what to take care of. We'll just have few minutes. I'll take a couple of minutes, Maria, and a couple of minutes, Charles. Your views, Maria, first. Open to you, but knowing your comments, anything you can throw light on the innovation culture, so to speak, which one can develop would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Very happy to. I'm trying to be very short and brief in the interest of time. But I think what I've been hearing from Jaya and Sarojit is very clearly that something new is equally exciting and scary. And what we're trying to do in PEPA with our, what I call distributed innovation structure, where we really put the power to the people of trying to explore, of trying to bring in all of these new things and research them thoroughly. This is where we are at. So we're trying to, when it comes to stakeholder buy-in, often it is created by way of our employees having played with some of the technology. So to give you an example, about 2 years ago, we had some engineers who were just extremely interested in blockchain. 2 years ago, even, it was unexplored, never mind now still. And they basically, they wanted to find a use case. And what they did was build, and we still use it to this day globally, a reward token platform called WOW, that now in the virtual world, as you can imagine, has absolutely exploded. And it's built on blockchain, and it's taken that fear away from the new. It was definitely kudos to that group, and that those people coming together in the safe space that Innovation Labs give people to prototype, to play. And kudos to them that we now have a blockchain research group even that is very interested in all of the research, and does that on a full-time basis. So this is really the beauty of, and this is, I think, why it's so important to open people's minds, have the exchange. And maybe a big takeaway of, and we do in Singapore, we do this a lot to the talent pipeline. It's not, so we work with a lot of students to give them an outlet to work on projects with us. It's as much as a talent pipeline as it is an exchange. It keeps us on top of things. It keeps us connected with academia. It allows us also to do that two-way exchange, and we help one another grow in this area and take that fear out, and ultimately deliver potential use cases to our leadership that they can then decide on, or at least understand where we're at in terms of emerging technologies. So that's a bit around our journey.
Lovely. I think both of them are super pragmatic. I've seen them greatly in action. It's also a way to give something back to the ecosystem as well. Fantastic examples. Probably last comment from you, Charles. Your views on barriers to entry. We spoke a little bit about developing a business case, so to speak, because finally all organizations are quite ROI focused. So last opening, closing remarks from you, but specific if you can touch upon the business case, Charles. Over to you.
Thanks, Vivek. And I'm feeling bad that I haven't seen any WOW coins from Maria's shop, so I'm going to look out for those. I mean, I think the comment that a few people have made around the new technology actually creates new kinds of challenges and new kinds of problems is absolutely our experience. So whether it's responsible AI and model risk, and so all of these new technologies have their own aspects to them. It could be regulatory new risk concerns, and that really resonates. What I'd say that we've found has been quite successful is going at things through a series of ever-increasing tests, ever-increasing size of tests. And just one small example, a few years ago, we had this idea around monitoring customers' spend and sending them notifications and advice when they were safe to save. And we launched an app for 200 people to test that idea. Everyone got comfortable with that. We then went in through a sandbox program with our regulator in the UK, the FSA, and we had 2,000 people with real money moving around. The third thing we did was say we still liked it. We said, okay, let's launch this as a standalone idea, and we launched an app called Connected Money and had several 100,000 users of that. And we found the bit that we really liked and that customers got real value from. And then we actually launched that in our main banking app. And this idea for me around testing and learning and iterating and scaling has been quite effective for us to get more comfortable with some of these ideas. And obviously in the other direction as well, some things we test don't work out, and then they feel like small tests rather than betting huge amounts. So we've certainly found that kind of approach quite effective for testing emerging technology and new business cases.
Beautiful. I think such pragmatic comments to sum it up. We are short of time anyway, and I don't think I will do justice to rephrase what our fantastic panelists spoke about. I hope the audience took a lot away from it. I'm sorry we didn't have too much time for Q&A, but as you could hear, both me and our panelists are quite accessible and open in communication. So do feel free to link down to reach out through social media channels. Just keep it real. That is a small request. Otherwise, thank you so much, my dear panelists. Thank you, ET, for organizing this beautiful discussion. So see you. Take care. Have a good week ahead. Bye.